I'm Mark Golub, and in the news, ongoing reaction and concern in the aftermath of the brutal murder and shooting at the Chabad synagogue of Poway, California, near San Diego, which took the life of Lori Gilbert Kay, a beloved woman, wife, mother of a 22-year-old daughter. Lori gave her life al Kiddush Hashem, sanctifying life, sacrificing herself to save her rabbi, another amazing human being, Yisrael Goldstein, who was also shot and wounded in the attack, losing his index finger. By the way, news reports tend to say the victims were killed. These people weren't killed. Killed is a sort of neutral word. People are killed by accidents all the time. Combatants kill one another. Lori Gilbert Kay was not killed. She was murdered by a mentally ill, crazed 19-year-old whose name does not merit mention. A crazed, hate-filled 19-year-old murdered Lori Gilbert Kay while she was taking part in a Passover service in her synagogue, and he would have murdered more if he could have. Now, the fact is that this is the second synagogue shooting in 6 months. In fact, the murder in Poway was 6 months to the day from the shooting in Pittsburgh's Tree of Life congregation, where 11 people were murdered and another 7 injured. The fact that this is the second synagogue shooting in 6 months has made some in the American Jewish community to begin to question whether the United States is going the way of prior Western European countries, where Jews were welcome for a time, and then waves of anti-Semitism drove them out. Or in Germany, a nation gone mad followed a lunatic leader and sought to perpetrate genocide on the Jewish people, murdering 6 million men, women, and 1.5 million children. And there are Jews today suggesting that the United States of America is in danger of becoming another Nazi Germany. If you've been watching JBS this week, you know I strongly dissent from such a view. As I see it, America and Americans have done nothing but display enormous sympathy for and solidarity with the Jewish community of America during this harrowing time. Christians, Muslims, secular Americans all have stood with the Jews of Pittsburgh and the Jews of Poway in vigils and memorials. These hate-filled murderers are condemned by all America. They are seen by America as aberrations of the vilest nature. As Thane Rosenbaum said earlier this week on JBS, in Germany, the people were cheering on the brown shirts. They were tacit, or to use Daniel Goldhagen's words, willing executioners. That's when the Jew has to worry about a culture or society turning against them. When the members of their society seem to take part, don't care about the brutalization of Jews. This is not the case here in America at all. America and Americans are not anti-Semitic. Our government is not anti-Semitic. There simply are, as there have always been, irrational, hateful people who hate Jews who are anti-Semites. This does not mean that there's nothing for American Jewry to worry about. To the contrary, the Jewish community must be concerned with copycats and must be more vigilant and take more precautions. And the Jewish community must rally women and men of conscience and goodwill to actively speak out against the hatred of minorities in this country, especially against anti-Semitic hatred and against anti-Zionism, which is most often thinly veiled anti-Semitism. The Jewish community must also speak out and speak up when the New York Times publishes despicable anti-Israel cartoons, or when the leadership of the Democratic Party is too frightened to pass an anti-Semitism resolution or an anti-BDS resolution, or to censure Ilhan Omar for her blatant anti-Semitism. It is simply unacceptable for Democratic Jews that Omar is still a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. The Jewish community must demand of our leaders that they condemn and ostracize any group that preaches violence against another. That's the challenge facing the American Jewish community today, and all those who want to change the current mood of hate and of violence in America today. Now, I've shared my perspective with you all week, but it's also important to hear the thoughts of others. So I'm delighted to have on our JBS phones from California the Senior Investigative Researcher at the Center on Extremism for the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, Joanna Mendelson. Joanna, thank you so much for joining us on JBS.
Thank you so much, Mark.
Joanna, before we talk about Poway and its implications, I want you to tell our audience a little bit about what you do at the ADL Center on Extremism.
Sure. So I'm part of the Center on Extremism. I'm on the national staff based here in Los Angeles. And the Center on Extremism is essentially a team of people who focuses, monitors, tracks extremist activity across the spectrum with the intention of helping disrupt extremist behavior, especially criminality.
I'm sorry.
And so,
in an effort to do what?
To disrupt. We ultimately want to disrupt.
Very good. And what are some of the strategies you would use to disrupt organizations, individuals, groups that are bent on hate-filled violence?
Part of the effort is to spotlight, to shine a very bright light on the activities, on the rhetoric, on the real-world actions of individuals, of groups, of movements, to help create an understanding and contextualize their behavior, to identify some of their subculture, and to bring that to the attention specifically of law enforcement, prosecutors, and the community at large.
That is
so
wonderful.
Yeah.
And what do you do in particular?
So my job, my specialty is on white supremacy, covering the country in regards to white supremacist ideology that takes all sorts of different forms. I also personally have a specialty in anti-government extremist activity, specifically a movement called the Sovereign Citizens.
I've never heard of them. Tell me about who they are.
Sovereign citizens are, it's another one of the threats facing our nation, and essentially they seek to undermine the democratic process. They do not believe that they are that the American government is legitimate, and somehow we've deviated from a society of God's laws. And therefore, every contract with our government, if it's our Social Security or driver's license, is null and void. It can essentially be ripped up. And they believe that they are outside, kind of essentially like right-wing anarchists.
I see. Where are they located?
Across the country. We see this group, we see this movement, and individuals who subscribe to this movement and this ideology in every state in our nation. And sadly, although it's rather obscure, it has a sizable population of adherents in our country and does represent a threat. The irony of this particular group is that they use the openness of our system, the openness of our legal system, to attack our system. And so they'll file paper liens and other sorts of documents within our court system in order to seek its demise, to bring it down.
Do they engage in violence at all?
Sadly, that is, across the spectrum of their type of criminal behavior. It starts at what we would call paper terrorism, but certainly escalates to violence. Usually spontaneous eruptions of violence, a traffic stop, an eminent domain issue, a neighbor dispute. But we've seen numerous incidents around the country in which individuals have acted on these beliefs, these extreme beliefs.
Okay. What is their name?
But white supremacy. Oh, sorry.
What is their name again?
Sovereign citizens.
Sovereign
And
citizens.
If you're ADL has a backgrounder that kind of walks, if you look on our website, that walks you through their ideology and their belief system and their actions across the years.
Okay.
And some of the indicators to identify their behavior.
Are you surprised I've never heard of them?
I'm not, actually, because they are rather obscure. And that there's so many markings that the average person would not be clued into. Especially for those who work in the legal world, who work in the court system, who work in law enforcement. The sovereign citizen movement is something that you would be rather well versed in,
okay.
or be at least have some exposure to. But the average person, I would say, doesn't really have contact with sovereigns.
Okay. I want to ask this question carefully because there's nobody better I can ask this of than you, Joanna. There are, every society has its fringe. And the fringe sometimes, the fringe can be lunatic. But every society has its fringe. And while it's upsetting, the fringe never is able to pose a real threat to society unless it moves out of the fringe and becomes part of the mainstream culture. As long as most of us never hear of this group, as long as it is in some way, Joanna, inside baseball, this is your world. This is what you spend your professional day on every day. And so do law enforcement officers. But that doesn't mean that this organization or ones like it pose a threat as far as I understand. If I'm wrong,
Sure.
I want you to tell me. And if I'm right, I want you to tell me.
Sadly to disagree. Okay, so listen, the fringe, regardless, and I understand your point, but the fringe, regardless of the fact that they are a fringe, right, be it an anti-government extremist, a white supremacist, or a sovereign citizen adherent, if they carry out criminality, if they subvert our democratic process, if they take away one life, one single life, then their impact on that family, right, or that person, that pekuach hanefesh, that the value of that one individual has ripple effects.
Absolutely.
And so we look at Timothy McVeigh, for example, right, who killed 169 people in Oklahoma. You look at Robert Bowers, who shot up Tree of Life Temple, and you see that it may be just one person, but the impact of that one person on a community, on a country, even globally, the global impact does have reverberations. And so, we're always asked numbers, right, to quantify numbers, but I actually find sometimes that can really misidentify some of the threat that is posed. So depending on the group, and I think that you look at it's one person killed in Poway synagogue, right, in Chabad, one person killed, but that, of course, one person who's armed with an ideology and translates that into violent action, be it a fringe ideology, has impact on us all.
Okay, I'm in a very awkward position here, but I want to use this extraordinary opportunity I have to speak with you for as sophisticated a discussion as possible. Okay. You are 100% correct that every single life, and it's not just a Jewish tradition, almost every religious tradition says something similar to the Jewish tradition. You take a life, it's as if you've destroyed the entire world.
Right.
And you have, and you know, Laurie Gilbert Kay's world, everybody in it, they'll never be the same. That world was destroyed. And in no way, and you know, if I were the rabbi of that family, I would be just holding on to them as tightly as I could, and my heart would break, and it would break for any family that has to go through this. That's not what this is about. That's not what your job is. That's not what we're trying to assess right now. We're not trying to assess what happens to individuals in horrible situations. I had a friend, long time friend, he's no longer with us, but he used to make the case. There were many people die every single year in America at railroad crossings because our society does not prioritize in terms of spending money the bars that come down, the gates that come down to keep cars from crossing train tracks, and trains every single year end up killing Americans on the tracks because this society doesn't want to pay money for those guard gates to come down. And if any individual dies because they are killed by a train, for that family, it's the end of the world. But we're talking about here is trying to construct social policy, and most important for me, and that's why I wanted to talk to you, Joanna. As you heard in my open, what worries me most is that the perspective on what we have here can be warped by people who are frightened. When people are frightened, they tend to see more ghosts than there really are. I believe that, as you heard me, it is necessary for the American Jewish community to be more vigilant, more careful, more protected, more aware, especially because in this world of ours, there tend to be copycats. But that's not the issue that I am speaking to or that you need to speak to. The question the ADL needs to speak to is, on a grand social scheme, are American Jews somehow in danger of an anti-Semitic threat erupting in this country, similar to what Jews experienced in Nazi Germany, because there was a lunatic in Pittsburgh and another lunatic in Poway? Not that they did not create as much pain and havoc, and they've changed the world, and on a personal level, we empathize and sympathize and we weep. But that's not your job. Your job is to help us understand on a social level, where are we in America today?
Sure. So, Mark, if I could use, sometimes I find data is the best way to help understand landscape, right? And so ADL, since 1979, has been collecting data every year in our audit of anti-Semitic incidents. And so this is data from information provided by victims, law enforcement, community leaders. We supplement it with media reports and research by my team on the Center on Extremism. And it truly provides a snapshot of the problem nationwide. And while identifying trends and possible changes in the types of activities reported, it gives us some really good insight. So we found in 2016 to 2017 a 57% increase in anti-Semitic incidents. In fact, this was the largest single-year increase since we've been doing the study in 1979. And just today, as you're familiar, ADL launched our anti-Semitic incident report, or we published it today for 2018.
I did see it. It's superbly done.
Thank you. Props to my colleagues who did the yeoman's work on it.
You tell them, Joanna, it's superbly done. And we reported on it
Fantastic.
here on JBS. But continue. This report came out literally. It happens that it came
Literally
out this
today.
week. Right.
Yeah, literally today. And essentially we found that violent attacks against the Jewish community here in the U.S. doubled as compared to the previous years. And while overall attacks that also include vandalism, harassment, as well as assaults, remained near record high levels. And so that speaks to the fact that, to your point of fear, being hyperbolic about this or feeding into fear is not an effective strategy. But certainly having an awareness of how we're faring as a country and having that gauge of various incidents to understand and contextualize is very important. And we found that there were 1,879 incidents nationwide. This is actually the third highest year on record for anti-Semitic attacks since we've been doing this study. And that's, if you kind of break it down, that's essentially 5 incidents every single day. And that, of course, includes the most deadly attack in our history, the attack on the Tree of Life Synagogue. So it's rather hard to find solace in these numbers. As we're seeing, this year was 48% higher than 2016 and 98% higher than 2015. And so we certainly have reason to be concerned. And sadly, it is underscored with this weekend's events, the murderous actions at the Chabad synagogue in Poway.
Okay. By the way, I think the numbers that are in the report that came out today for 2018 are dramatic. And I think they show something. And again, I am in an uncomfortable position because I don't want to seem to be saying they don't matter. But I need you to permit me to push you a little bit.
Sure,
you said
sure.
1879 is the number this year. What was which year was
Right.
which year? You said that was third highest. When was the highest?
The highest year was 1994 with 2,066 incidents.
Yes, and what was the second highest?
Oh, now, Mark, you're really making me have to look
If
at
you
my
don't,
data.
if you don't know, it doesn't matter.
I don't have it off the top of my head, but definitely 1994 was the highest. 2015, we saw 942 incidents.
Yes, and by the way,
2016,
that's very important for our audience to hear. We've done studies of the FBI statistics on hate crimes. During the 4 years Bill Clinton was president from 1996 to 2000, there were more than 1,000 attacks against Jews every year, and they accounted for 75% of all religious-based attacks. This is in 1996 through the year 2000. Now, what Joanna has pointed out, and the ADL has pointed out, they steadily went down for many years, and now they're rising again. However, American Jews should not think that we're at an all-time high. We're not at an all-time high, and there's been a certain degree of anti-Semitism in our country, and there is everywhere in the world, and there will be forever. And I keep coming back to this theme, Joanna, and it's wonderful to be able to talk to you, and it's able for me to be able to talk to you this way. The reason I keep pushing you is it's horrible on an individual basis that there are now almost 2,000 anti-Semitic attacks. They're not all violent, by the way, but there are 2,000 anti-Semitic acts a year in America. That is terrible.
Right.
In one way, it is terrible. At the same time, I feel the responsibility someone like you has, and someone like me who is watching this and studying this. It's on television every day. My responsibility is to speak to the American Jewish community and to the general American community that watches all the time and try to give them a balance and a perspective. And I am making the case that while 2000 is terrible, it was terrible at 1000 for many, many, many years. It's better at 600, and you know it would be better at 0. It's never.
It would be better at 0. But, Mark, if you also look, I've been doing this work for 18 years, and even, and not to be hyperbolic in any ways, but things have never been so busy. It is true that extremists, and my particular expertise, as I mentioned, is to track white supremacy and the obsession with Jews, the obsession that dominates their conspiracies, their ideology, their rhetoric, and even their actions is something that is part and parcel of their belief system. And so you look at groups like the alt-right, or you look at incidents like Charlottesville. Take Charlottesville, that had literally nothing to do with Jews, right? It was about Emancipation Park changing its name from the Confederacy. And yet, all the issues surrounding that was challenging the changing the name and, quote, erasing history. But the groups that rallied around this central theme were white supremacists, neo-Nazis, anti-government extremists who gathered together in Charlottesville. And throughout the protest, anti-Semitism was front and center. So as they're yelling, "You will not replace us," of course, everyone's familiar, right, that they changed the refrain to "Jews will not replace us." And what they're railing against is this conspiracy that America is being drowned by this rising tide of color that is seeking to destroy their existence. And it is controlled and manipulated by the Jews. They look at the Jews as the puppeteers. And this is one of the cornerstones of their ideology. And they look at Jews and their encouragement of liberalism, of democracy, of immigration, control of media, as contributing to this genocide, to this Holocaust. And in many ways, this is a call to action. And we've seen, as in the case of Poway, we've seen as in case in Christchurch, where that call to action, that feeling that they have no other choice, that their future looks very bleak, as a way to respond. And so as I do this work, and yes, I am embedded in looking at groups and individuals and rhetoric, and my perspective is certainly very kind of insider baseball. But as part of that insider baseball, I do want to share that anti-Semitism is sadly alive and well when it comes to the core beliefs that these groups are trying to promote.
I understand.
And you look,
but Joanna, I must cut you off only
Yeah.
because of time.
Please.
I want to continue this discussion with you. Can I call you on another time and we continue?
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
are
Welcome that.
fabulous. And I really, my
Great.
dream now is that one day you'll be in the New York area, you'll come in studio. But I can't thank you enough for,
Fantastic.
but not only have you given us time, it's important to hear somebody as articulate as you and as reasonable as you address the issues. I have a million more questions. I just have to hang up on you because we're out of time.
That sounds great.
I will call
we
you
look
again.
forward to the conversation. Thank you for highlighting it.
Thank you, sweetheart. Be well.
Okay. Be well. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Joanna Mendelson, Senior Investigative Researcher at the Center on Extremism for the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League. Be in touch with me with your own thoughts. My email address is rabbigolub@jbstv.org. My thanks as always to our director on this edition of In the News, Dara Golub, as well as Michael Paley and John McDevitt, and to the producers of this edition of In the News, Carol Lilienthal and Tisha Bader. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.